It was 3:15 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday when Nurse Quinn Vance finally clocked out. Her scrubs were stained, her hands were shaking, and she had just been told she was fired. She walked toward the exit, believing her life as a healer was over. But she never made it to the parking lot. The automatic doors blasted open, and the hospital lobby went dead silent. 6 men, built like mountains and dressed in tactical gear, marched in. These weren't police. They were Navy SEALs. They weren't looking for a doctor. They were looking for her. When the commanding officer stopped in front of the trembling nurse, he didn't arrest her. He dropped to one knee and said a single word that changed everything, "Ma'am." What secret was Quinn hiding? And why would the world's most lethal warriors bow to a woman who emptied bedpans for a living? The fluorescent lights of Mercy General Hospital in downtown Chicago hummed with a headache-inducing buzz that Quinn Vance had stopped noticing 20 years ago. At 54, Quinn was the kind of nurse who held the department together, though you wouldn't know it by looking at her personnel file. She was quiet, efficient, and hid her grey hair in a tight, sensible bun. She was the one who held the hands of dying patients when their families couldn't make it in time. She was the one who cleaned up the messes the residents left behind. But tonight, Quinn wasn't a hero. Tonight, she was a liability. "I don't care about the Hippocratic Oath right now, Quinn. I care about the budget variance report." The voice belonged to Marcus Sterling, the hospital's newly appointed chief of administration. He was 32, wore a suit that cost more than Quinn's car, and had never touched a patient in his life. He stood in the cramped break room, blocking the door, tapping a tablet with an impatient manicured finger. Quinn sat on the vinyl couch, her shoulders slumped. She was exhausted. 12 hours of trauma care had drained her. But it was the confrontation with Sterling that was making her hands tremble. "Mr. Sterling," Quinn said, her voice raspy. "The patient, Mr. Henderson, was going into septic shock. He's homeless. He didn't have insurance info on him. If I hadn't opened that specific antibiotic cache, he would be dead right now. Not in an hour. Now." Sterling sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "And because you bypassed authorization to access restricted high-cost medication for a John Doe, you've flagged us for an audit. Do you know how much that medication costs per dose? It's reserved for critical insured cases or active duty personnel." "He is a human being." Quinn snapped, a rare flash of anger in her eyes. "He's a veteran, actually. He mumbled it when he was delirious." "They all say they're veterans, Quinn. It gets them sympathy." Sterling sneered, checking his watch. "Look, this isn't the first time you've gone rogue. You prioritize emotion over protocol. Mercy General is a business. We cannot sustain bleeding hearts." He looked up from his tablet, his face cold. "Pack your locker. You're suspended pending a formal review board on Monday. But between us, I'd start looking for a job at a nursing home. You're done here." The silence that followed was heavier than lead. Quinn felt a stinging sensation behind her eyes, but she refused to cry. Not in front of him. She had been a nurse for 30 years. She had seen things Sterling couldn't imagine in his worst nightmares. She nodded once, stood up, and brushed past him. "Hand in your badge at security on the way out," Sterling called after her, twisting the knife. Quinn walked down the pristine white hallway. The night shift staff avoided her gaze. In hospitals, bad news travels faster than a virus. They already knew. Young nurses she had trained, doctors she had assisted during 12-hour surgeries. They all looked down at their charts or phones. Nobody wanted to be associated with the woman who just got the axe. She reached her locker, her fingers numb as she spun the dial. She placed her stethoscope, a gift from her late father, into her tote bag. She took the photo of her daughter, who was away at college, and placed it gently inside. She stripped off her ID badge. Quinn Vance, RN. Head trauma nurse. It felt like stripping off her skin. She walked toward the main lobby. Outside, the Chicago rain was hammering against the glass, turning the city into a blur of grey and neon. It was a fitting backdrop for the end of her career. She had nothing left. Her savings were meager, drained by her husband's cancer treatments before he passed 3 years ago. This job was her lifeline. As she reached the sliding glass doors, the security guard, a kindly older man named Arthur, gave her a sad look. "Rough night, Quinn." "You could say that, Arthur," she whispered, clutching her bag tight against her chest. "Take care of yourself." "You too, Elle." Arthur stopped mid-sentence. He looked past Quinn toward the darkness of the parking lot. His eyes widened. "What in the world?" Arthur muttered. Quinn turned around. Through the rain-slicked glass, she saw lights. Not ambulance lights. These were piercing, high-intensity beams cutting through the storm. 3 massive black SUVs, totally unmarked, screeched to a halt right in the ambulance bay, blocking the entrance. They moved with aggressive precision. "Is that a VIP?" Arthur asked, stepping back. "We didn't get a call for a VIP." The doors of the SUVs flew open in perfect synchronization. Quinn's heart skipped a beat. She knew that movement. She knew that tactical precision. 6 men stepped out into the pouring rain. They didn't run. They stalked. They were dressed in full tactical gear, heavy vests, combat boots, holsters strapped to their thighs. They weren't police SWAT. They carried themselves with a heavier, darker weight. They were operators. The automatic doors of the ER hissed open. The storm blew in cold and wet, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop for a different reason. The 6 men entered the lobby. They were soaking wet water dripping from their tactical vests onto the polished linoleum. They were terrifying. The sheer size of them made the lobby feel small. One of them, a giant of a man with a thick beard and a scar running through his eyebrow, scanned the room. His eyes were like targeting lasers. The hospital went dead quiet. A patient in the waiting room dropped his magazine. A nurse at the triage desk froze with the phone halfway to her ear. Marcus Sterling came running from the administrative corridor, his expensive shoes clicking frantically on the floor. He saw the wet floor, the mud, and the weapons. "Excuse me. Excuse me," Sterling shouted, his voice cracking. "You cannot bring weapons in here. This is a sterile environment. I am the chief of administration, and I demand to know who is in charge." The man with the beard didn't even look at Sterling. He walked right past him, as if Sterling were a ghost. The other 5 men fanned out, securing the perimeter of the lobby without saying a word. It was a military formation, a defensive perimeter. Sterling, red-faced and feeling his authority crumbling, tried to grab the arm of the lead soldier. "I'm talking to you. Get out of my hospital." The soldier stopped. He turned his head slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at Sterling with eyes that had seen the worst of humanity. "Sir, step aside, or be removed." The threat was so calm, so absolute, that Sterling physically recoiled, tripping over his own feet. The soldier turned his attention back to the room. He wasn't looking for a doctor. He wasn't looking for the ER. His eyes locked onto Quinn. She was standing near the exit, clutching her tote bag, her back against the wall. She felt small. She felt terrified. Had she done something wrong? Was this about the unauthorized medicine? Had Sterling called the federal police, the giant soldier started walking toward her. The heavy thud of his combat boots echoed in the silent lobby. Thud, thud, thud. Quinn's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She pressed herself harder against the wall. The soldier stopped 3 feet in front of her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He smelled of rain gun oil and old tobacco. He towered over her, blocking out the light. Quinn looked up, trembling. I don't... The soldier reached up. His hand, gloved and massive, moved toward his face. The entire lobby held its breath. Arthur, the security guard, reached for his radio, thinking Quinn was about to be attacked, but the soldier didn't strike. He removed his ballistic sunglasses. His eyes were a piercing blue, and as he looked at Quinn, the hardness in them vanished, replaced by an emotion that looked painfully like adoration. "Ma'am?" His voice was deep, gravelly, and loud enough for everyone to hear. And then the impossible happened. The giant soldier snapped his heels together and threw a crisp, razor-sharp salute. "Ma'am," he repeated. "Team Bravo is present and accounted for." Behind him, the 5 other operators snapped to attention and saluted in unison. The silence in the lobby of Mercy General was absolute. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for cathedrals or bomb sites. Marcus Sterling stood with his mouth open, looking like a fish gasping for air. The triage nurses were standing on their desks to get a better look. Quinn stared at the man, saluting her. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at his face, really looked at him. The blue eyes, the jagged scar through the eyebrow, the way he held his jaw. A memory sharp and violent slashed through her confusion. Dust, the smell of burning diesel, the sound of a helicopter rotor screaming overhead. A young man, barely 20, bleeding out on a stretcher in a tent that was shaking from mortar blasts. Quinn's bag dropped from her hand, hitting the floor with a soft thud. "Jackson," she whispered. "The soldier commander, Ma." Jackson Reaper Thorne broke his salute. A slow, tired smile spread across his rugged face. It made him look 10 years younger. "I told you I'd find you, Quinn," he said softly. "It took the Navy 15 years to declassify the logs, and it took me another 5 to track you down through the name changes. But I told you. You were dead." Quinn stammered, tears instantly pooling in her eyes. "Your vitals on the chopper. You flatlined." "I'm hard to kill," Jackson said. He gestured to the men behind him. "We all are. Thanks to you." He turned, slightly glaring at the room at large, his voice returning to that command pitch. "Is this woman being processed for discharge?" Sterling, sensing a shift in the power dynamic, but too arrogant to read the room correctly, stepped forward again. He straightened his tie. "She is being terminated for gross misconduct," Sterling announced, trying to regain control. "She stole hospital property, and I don't care who you are, this is a private matter. You are trespassing." Jackson turned to Sterling. The smile was gone. The predator was back. "Terminated." Jackson repeated the word as if it tasted like poison. "Yes." "Fired," Sterling said. "She's a liability." Jackson laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. He looked at his team. "Boys, did you hear that the suit thinks the White Witch is a liability?" The other 5 SEALs chuckled. It wasn't a happy sound. It was menacing. "The White Witch," Sterling frowned. "Her name is Quinn." "That's what you call her," Jackson said, stepping into Sterling's personal space until the administrator had to crane his neck up. In the Hindu Kush in the Korangal Valley, in places you don't even know exist. We called her the White Witch, because only magic could bring men back from the dead the way she did. Jackson turned back to Quinn. He saw her trembling hands. He saw the fear. He saw the cheap tote bag with her life inside it. His expression softened with heartbreaking gentleness. "Quinn," he said, "we didn't just come to say hello. We came because we owe a debt. A life debt." "Jackson, I was just doing my job," she said, wiping her eyes. "I was just a volunteer nurse with the Red Cross. I wasn't even supposed to be in that sector." "That's exactly the point," Jackson said. "You weren't supposed to be there. But when the ambush happened, when the extraction team was pinned down, you didn't run. You came for us." He looked at his watch. "We have a transport waiting. But we aren't leaving until we settle this disrespect." Jackson looked at Sterling. "You said she stole hospital property." "Yes, expensive antibiotics," Sterling squeaked. "How much?" Jackson asked, reaching into his tactical vest. He pulled out a thick wad of cash $100 bills held together by a rubber band. It was mission contingency money. I don't know the exact figure, maybe $2,000, including the fines." Jackson tossed the entire stack of cash at Sterling. The bills hit the administrator's chest and fluttered to the floor like heavy rain. There was easily $10,000 there. "Keep the change," Jackson said. "Buy yourself a spine." He turned back to Quinn. "Grab your bag, ma'am. We have a meeting to get to." "Meeting with who?" Quinn asked, bewildered. "I don't have anywhere to go, Jackson. I just lost my job." Jackson grinned. "You don't need this job, and the meeting isn't a who, it's a them. But first we need to get you out of here. But before we go..." He paused, looking at the security guard, Arthur. "Arthur, was it?" Arthur nodded, wide-eyed. "Yes, sir." "You were the only one who looked at her with respect when we walked in," Jackson said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy coin, a challenge coin embossed with a golden trident. He pressed it into Arthur's hand. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, you call the number on the back of that coin." Arthur looked at the coin, then at Quinn. "Go on, Quinn. I think you're in good hands." Quinn looked at Jackson, then at Sterling, who was on his knees, scrambling to pick up the cash. She looked at the hospital that had drained her for 20 years. "Okay," she whispered. "Form up," Jackson barked. The SEALs instantly surrounded Quinn. It was a diamond formation, the kind used to protect the president or high-value assets. Quinn was in the center. "Moving." They marched her out of the hospital through the rain and toward the black SUVs. As the cold air hit her face, Quinn's mind began to drift back. The adrenaline of the moment was unlocking doors in her memory she had welded shut years ago. The rain in Chicago faded away. The gray concrete turned to red sand. Flashback 2004. Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. Quinn was 34 years old. She wasn't a trauma nurse then. She was a volunteer with Doctors Without Borders, stationed at a small protected clinic near a village that was supposed to be a green zone safe. She was naive. She thought she could save the world with bandages and kindness. She was scrubbing instruments in the sterilization tent when the explosion happened. It wasn't a mortar.